Malcolm X said the most disrespected person in America is the black woman. The most unprotected person in America is the black woman. The most neglected person in America is the black woman. Welcome back to Being Heard, Two Black Women, Coffee and Conversations. I'm your host, Leah, and with me is my co host today. And today we have Leo Landis, State Curator of the State Historical Society of Iowa. Greetings. How's everybody doing today?
I'm doing well, Leah. Thanks so much to you and Dana for having me on today.
Thanks for being here, Leo. We're really excited to dig into a little Iowa history today, especially during Black History Month. So this is really great. Thanks for being on. So we wanted to start out a little bit talking about, what does your title mean? What do you do at the State Historical Society for people who don't know?
Yep. Quick version on what a curator does is I tell Iowa history stories in the framework of United States history, and I do that through artifacts, so the objects that people used. I do that through photographs, and I do that through words in the label content, and sometimes, then through video or slideshows too. So that's the short version, and I do try to tell stories from all across our state from people of all different backgrounds. That's important to me.
So, as a state curator, how did you get into this particular type of work?
When I was in fifth grade and then going into sixth grade in the fall, that was the year of the bicentennial, 1976. And I had always loved history. When I was in third grade, my mom, who was a big influence, she bought me some history books that I read over and over again on U.S. history primarily, but some world history material too. And so from my boyhood, had some things that knew I always loved history. And that experience in seeing the Freedom Train in Valley Junction area. It was a cross-country tour of American history during the bicentennial. Just inspired me to love American history and be curious about our state and nation's history.
Wow, that's awesome. So tell us a little bit about some of the Black themed exhibits you've had. We know, of course, the Patton's Neighborhood, great exhibit, really cool pieces of history in there. Tell us a little bit about that and how you put that together.
Sure. So the Patton's Neighborhood exhibit predated me just a little bit. I've been with the Historical Society since 2010. Started my museum career in 1986 as Iowa State student working at Living History Farms. But getting back to what the Historical Society and the Historical Museum have been doing, that Patton's Neighborhood exhibit told the story of a thriving Black community along Center Street from about 10th Street to 15th Street and north up to University and a little beyond that. So for Central Iowa listeners can get a sense of that geography. And it was a thriving Black community from the 19-teens into the 1960s. Robert Patton grew up in Georgia, comes to Iowa in the early 1900s, Des Moines by 1910. And as a printer, he was saving, even in some of his earliest work, examples of what he was printing. So it's a couple of thousand items that he either printed or are related to his work that tell the story of this thriving Black community in Central Iowa that even in my own, lifetime growing up in Central Iowa, didn't realize that story and how the Center Street community was such a vital part of that neighborhood, and yet urban renewal in the 1950s and 60s and also the interstate disrupted that community of primarily Black folks in Central Iowa. So my predecessor, Jack Lufkin, had curated an exhibit that we had in our atrium called Patton's Neighborhood. A lot of your listeners may know our building leaked at that time, and Patton's Neighborhood was in that space that could get leaked on. So we deinstalled that a little before I started. We've now got in a section in our area called Visible Vault that we try to feature Robert Patton's story, but we really do try to work some of his collections into other areas too.
What are some other exhibits that you've been a part of since your time?
Yeah, two of my favorites in the last 5 years or 6 years We did one called Iowans at Home, Work, and Play. And in that exhibit, knew I wanted to work in the Buxton, Iowa story. And again, I'm sure a lot of your listeners are familiar with that community down in Monroe County, coal mining community. Predominantly black, but blacks and whites living together in a community of about 7,000 people. So just a really rich story of a community from around 1900 to 1920. And I knew the doctor who was the first black man to go to University of Iowa's med school, Edward Carter, that we had a photo of him. So I used that, but I was looking for things in our collection through our database to see, did we have anything from Buxton? And I was finding nothing in the museum collection. In our special collections research library, we've got oral histories of those people, but we don't have any artifacts, or at least that's what I thought. And then as I was working on a subsequent exhibit, I see a reference in our suitcases and bag collection that, and I may get it a little wrong, but I think it was described as medical bag used by Negro mine, M-I-N-E, doctor. And I just, as I was sitting at the computer screen, I'm like, I know who this is. Well, the material was donated in the 1960s by Marion Carter, the daughter of Edward Carter. They had moved to Detroit, and that to me is, part of where our state hasn't lived up to being a place of opportunity for all Iowans, is when the coal mines shut down in Buxton in around 1920, Edward Carter, as a black professional, doesn't have a lot of options in Iowa. So he grew up in the Oskaloosa area. He wasn't native-born Iowan. His parents had been enslaved. He was born in Virginia, and he came to Iowa when he was about 2 years old. But S. Joe Brown had told him, a prominent black lawyer of Iowa was from down around there, said Edward should go to University of Iowa Law School, or med school, excuse me, and he did. And so he's the first black man to get a medical degree, and he has a thriving business in Buxton till the mine shut down. And where is a thriving black community in 1920? Detroit. And so the Carters moved to Detroit. His daughter, Marion, as she's an adult woman in the 1960s, she is wise enough to send some of her mom and dad's material to us. But the curator at the time, using the words of the 1960s, only says his last name, Carter. So it says, I think, Negro Mine Doctor Carter. We've updated that language, but I was just like, oh my gosh. And then I discovered we've got his Oskaloosa High School diploma. We've got Rose Carter's wedding shoes in the collection. We've got a couple of University of Iowa pennants that Edward Carter had. So having those tangible artifacts, to me, that's what museums are so great for, is it's like, these were the things connected to real people that people had that meant something to them. And so to be able to see Edward Carter's photo that we're pretty sure Rose sent to us, or excuse me, Marion, his daughter, sent to us, is just so powerful to say, these are important stories for Iowans to know. And so that was, to me, to rediscover that story was a blessing. And then another one that's been a recent story that has just been so rich to learn is wife and husband Madeline and John McKee, who were a farm couple in Dallas County, eastern Dallas County, and they both had been enslaved. They were Tennessee was where they had been enslaved. John, during the war, signs up and fights on behalf of the Union, so he's fighting in a black regiment. But after the war, they come to Iowa. Well, I was looking for photographs for our Iowa 175 exhibit. 2021 was our 175th anniversary of statehood. It's like, let's see what other stories that we haven't told. And I see this photo of three black girls at the time in the 1870s, and it says Lucy, Nora, Samantha McKee. And then I look, and here's a photo of John McKee, their father, and then another photo of Lucy, Nora, and Samantha, probably in the 1890s, right around 1900. They grew up on a rented farm in eastern Dallas County. John, and I'm pretty sure Madeline is buried with him because the bystander, the newspaper, the black newspaper, says she's buried in the family plot. Her name's not on John's gravestone, but I've been to John's grave in a rural cemetery just east of Van Meter. But then Lucy, Nora, Samantha, Mary, they come to Des Moines. They don't stay on a farm. But we have a quilt done for St. Paul's AME Church then that
Oh,
Nora McKee Dixon worked on. So that's on display, and we used the photo of the three girls as little girls when they had first come to Iowa, and then as young women. And it's just they're beautiful people. It's a beautiful photo, and it reminds Iowans that people of all different backgrounds have come to our state seeking opportunity to build lives and have just the sort of everyday life that all of us are trying to do today too, and that those stories go back to the 1850s, 1860s, 1870s, and so those have
but
been
it's
two great stories.
history, right?
Yeah.
That's a beautiful thing. Like capturing, like quilting, has caught my attention. Being a person that crafts myself, we don't often get seen, even in textiles. Even though we know who picked the cotton, but there's never a connection to a finished product. Um, I am
And
so
Leah, if I can just jump in quickly on that too, what's great about that St. Paul's AME quilt is that it's a signature quilt. So it's
okay.
got names of men and women from the community on each block, in the center of each block. So it helps document not just Nora McKee Dixon's work, but also other blacks at St. Paul's AME Church.
Oh my God. Okay, I got something new to go check out because I have a friend. She travels to like different quilting museums, and now that's another thing to get her to come visit me again here. Um, these stories, I love that you're able to like curate them. We're in the midst of Black History Month, basically, and I still always say American history with an emphasis on Black people. And as we've been watching, some listeners are probably watching the 1619 Project or have been reading a book. And I listened to how pivotal that could have probably been for a lot of people here had they had more connections. Are there more things that still get you surprised, or do you still get surprised by some of the Black Iowa history that you find?
So I think now I've done a pretty decent job, but there's the Joyner family. I think they were Sailor Township here in Des Moines, and
Oh,
so we've got some things connected to them that I need to do a little more digging on and get their story down. And going back to a story we didn't share, but one that I love that's in our collection, and was fortunate enough to know Robert Morris before he passed, the grandson of James B. Morris, and then Brad Morris, both Des Moines lawyers. But James B. served in World War I, and so when we were doing our World War I exhibit, knew that story. But within our World War I collections, pretty sure it was the Black Women of Des Moines commissioned a little poster that a black man from, again, Sailor Township at one time had a decent black population, likely connected to coal mining and farming both. But it lists around 150 black soldiers, primarily from central Iowa, have done some research on all of those men, but know that there's some really compelling stories in there. So a lot of Iowans don't know story of a man named Wayne Miner, who was a coal miner from Appanoose County down around Centerville.
okay.
And he gets sent out on a mission on November 11th, 1918, and is killed by the Germans. And so a black Iowa man who gives his life on the last day of World War I. He's honored at the Centerville Cemetery with other Appanoose County men, but the other story connected to him is he married a woman from Kansas City, so the segregated Legion post in Kansas City is the Wayne Miner Legion post. But Iowans should be proud to know that Wayne Miner enlisted out of Appanoose County and is someone who gave his life for the war to for democracy in World War I. So
I'm just
finding
shocked.
stories like that.
Appanoose County. I've actually had to work down there, so I wouldn't have never have known it because Appanoose Centerville. I've never seen any black people down there. Never would have never connected black people being in that area. Are you shocked a little bit, Dana? Because I know I am.
No, not at all. And a lot of the reason why I'm not shocked has to do with the State Historical Society of Iowa. It has to do with the museum. It has to do with, and I wanted to get to this too, Leo, like some of the webinars, the Iowa History 101 webinar, I think is what it's called. Like that has been very illuminating for me as someone who's lived in Iowa all her life and just had no idea. So a lot of what you're talking about, at least at the time I went to school, it wasn't taught in school. And, chances are it's probably not going to be taught. So it is very important. Like your work is amazing. And so I wanted to get to more of like, what are some initiatives or things that you have coming up for the rest of this year that people can look forward to?
Sure. So the building has been under construction, so we're in a little bit of a hiatus, but we're going to be picking things back up this fall with an exhibit on. Doesn't have a title yet, but it'll be celebrating stories of civics, and it's the 75th anniversary of Edna Griffin and Leonard Bibbs, and I apologize, Dana. I always forget the third guy who was part of that first group. I know. Edna had her daughter Phyllis too, is the story I've heard with her at the Katz drugstore. And again, people think about segregation in the South, but it's like, folks, that was happening in Iowa too. I mean, Roger Maxwell has a story in 1967 where he talks about only being shown certain neighborhoods when he and Bunny, his wife, come to Des Moines. So we think about stories like that. So we're pretty sure we're going to work Edna Griffin's story into our civics exhibit on how to be an involved and engaged citizen. So that should be opening in September. We'll have some other stories in there too. Likely work in, John and Mary Beth Tinker and the Tinker case here in Des Moines that goes to the Supreme Court and saying, you can be a student and wanting to share your voice and make things right, and you may end up getting a case that's a benchmark Supreme Court case. So reminding Iowans, so many of us say, oh, nothing of significance happened in Iowa, and it's like there are so many rich, compelling stories like Edna Griffin, before Rosa Parks. So I hate when Edna Griffin gets called the Rosa Parks of Iowa. It's like, well, she was a little before Rosa Parks. No knock on Mrs. Parks there and the
Right.
people in Montgomery, but Edna is a righteous person in her own way. So
Yeah.
that's probably our biggest one coming up is a civics exhibit this fall.
That'd be super cool. When I was at the register, I interviewed Edna shortly before she passed away. And I can't remember off the top of my head what year that was. She was at a nursing home over on the west side and, was still able to speak and everything. And that was really, like, cool. So, yeah, people, will love to know more about the role she played because it was super important. Leah, was there anything else?
I think we have really covered it. Just housekeeping of State Historical Society has a Facebook page and an Instagram. I believe Leo was sharing that that's there, and then of course, located in the city of Des Moines. Um, and people should really check that out, whether it be this time of the year or later. But I've always enjoyed going there. I honestly started coming around I Make Me a World, and I think we didn't talk about that We Are Iowa book. I mean, it's a black book with all the black Iowans. Um,
Outside in,
there
right?
you go. I actually purchased my copy at the State Historical Society. And I love knowing that there are always people prior. Rosa Parks got the attention, and it's again like no shade with her. However, there have been such a significance, and being someone that's from the South, I did always wonder about how was it here in Iowa during segregation. Like, there's not a kumbaya moment. Like, there still had to be a whites only and a colored section. Um, but was there anything else, maybe, Leo, that you would like our listeners to know more about?
If your listeners want to come in and they can ask at the front desk, say I heard on the podcast with Leah and Dana that Leo Landis said to ask for him. I seriously mean it. We serve all Iowans, and so I'm not always free, but they can say, Leah wanted to show me a couple of highlights, and Dana knows this story. You may know it too, Leah. But right now we have the flag from the Black Civil War Regiment, the first colored regiment of Iowa, is what they called themselves. And it was sewn by black women of Keokuk and Muscatine. So when you talk about Iowa history, that artifact is one of my top 5 in our collection, and it's on display right now. So would be happy to meet any of your listeners who stop in. We're open Tuesday through Friday right now, 9 to 4:30. So show them where that flag is and maybe say hello, because the history that we're all making today is stories we should collect. So if you've got some elders or your family history that needs to be saved somewhere, the African American Museum of Iowa is a great place, but that's stories we need to tell here in Des Moines too for the whole state. So love meeting people and hearing stories.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Leo. This has been fantastic.
Thank you as well. And I thought I would tease and say he said Leo will show them, not Leah, in case. Because I was like, that kind of sounds similar, but it could just be
They
me and my
do.
So thank you for coming today. And we ask that our listeners follow us on YouTube, Instagram, Facebook. You can hear us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and iHeartRadio. And we're happy to be also a partner with Black Headline News. Have a good day. Thank you.